Hi, I'm Kelsey, and today I'll be breaking down the rhetorical elements of MONTERO by Lil Nas X. First things first, let's watch the music video together so everyone has a baseline for what I will be analyzing. Okay, now that you know exactly what I am talking about, let's get to the heart of it. Over the next several minutes, I will explain how Lil Nas X's MONTERO, Call Me By Your Names, lyricism and symbolism rebel against heteronormativity through Lil Nas X's public embrace of his lust. Let's get some context for the song and my argument. The name of the song, MONTERO, is actually Lil Nas X's legal name, and him titling the song after himself indicates how closely it is tied to his identity. The second part of the name was inspired by the 2017 film Call Me By Your Name, which Lil Nas X says was one of the very first gay films he ever watched. He was drawn in by the movie's theme of, quote, like calling somebody by your own name as lovers, then like trying to keep it between you two kind of thing, quote. The song and movie do share many overlapping themes. Some of the key themes found throughout the song and music video are lust, religion, identity, fame, and secrecy. What is heteronormativity? According to the Merriam-Webster dictionary, heteronormativity is of, relating to, or based on the attitude that heterosexuality is the only normal and natural expression of sexuality. A heteronormative society is harmful to, quote, queer folks, trans folks, and folks of color who are inherently outside the demands of heteronormativity. Heteronormativity helps maintain many oppressive aspects of society, such as the gender binary, patriarchal gender roles, monogamy, and white supremacy. We should also get a baseline understanding of the history around coming out. Originally, the term coming out referred to gay people coming out to other gay people. It originated with enormous drag balls that were held in major cities. It was when a gay man would formally present himself to the gay community. These men would claim their place in the community and embrace their identity publicly. Coming out as referring to telling your friends, family, and the public was an idea that came around much later. Essentially, there was nothing to even come out of before, closet or otherwise. As Karen Marie Harbeck says in their book, Coming Out of the Classroom Closet, living in a heteronormative society leads to queer people facing the, quote, constant and complex choice of potentially posing as normal among other normals, quote, in order to avoid being negatively stereotyped. By using the covering strategy and publicly denying their sexuality, queer people help maintain the heteronormative status quo that harms them. Sears and Williams, the authors of Overcoming Heterosexism and Homophobia, state that, quote, the single most effective way to change homophobic attitudes is through one-to-one personal context, quote, which makes the act of coming out crucial in the fight against anti-LGBTQ prejudice. The fact that queer people are expected to spend any time at all in the closet and keep their sexuality a secret until they come out is an idea that creates comfort for the heteronormative society. Queer people being explicitly out and comfortable with who they are, like Lil Nas X does with MONTERO, is inherently anti-heteronormative. In MONTERO, Lil Nas X first rebels against heteronormativity through his rejection of secrecy. As I mentioned previously, MONTERO and the movie Call Me By Your Name share a lot of themes, and one of those shared themes is secrecy. According to Lit Charts, quote, a major component of Elio and Oliver's affair is the fact that it is secret. They share hidden moments, always secreted away from others, and each of them carries on affairs with women in public, quote. Lil Nas X expresses that he likes the idea of keeping things between two lovers, but it becomes clear through the lyrics that he only likes this idea in an aesthetic sense, as he rejects the physical elements of hiding away part of yourself through his lyrics and music video. The opening lines to the MONTERO music video are as follows, quote, we hide the parts of ourselves we don't want the world to see. We lock them away. We tell them no. We banish them. But here we don't. Welcome to MONTERO. Quote, the first line refers to hiding a part of our identity we don't think that the world will accept. Lil Nas X then uses the words hide, lock them away, know, and banish to invoke the idea of secrecy. But in his self-named world, MONTERO, things don't work that way. This initial rejection of repression of identity sets up a key theme for the song. The lyrics, you live in the dark, boy, I cannot pretend, are a direct reference to the closet. The man that Lil Nas X is interested in is not living to his fullest. In Lil Nas X's interview with Genius, where he explains the lyrics of the song, he says he is telling the man that, quote, your life is not in a happy spot, quote, and that he can't pretend, quote, I don't see you doing this shit, quote, when the man is making eyes at him. Lil Nas X is stating here that he does not want this man to keep hiding his real self, and that is the reason the man is unhappy. This theme continues with the lyrics, I'm not fazed, only here to sin, if even in your garden you know that you can. Lil Nas X says that he is announcing that, quote, if you don't got a girl, you ain't hiding behind a cloak, quote, in that he is interested in being with you. He is deliberately announcing that he is looking to get laid and wants to be with somebody who is out and proud. Lil Nas X's rejection of secrecy only fails when his lust turns into desperation. According to Lil Nas X, this is where he could be referred to as, quote, down bad for the man he is interested in. In his Genius video, Lil Nas X describes it as him not caring if it's a public thing and that he doesn't care if his partner says I love you and doesn't mean it. Lil Nas X is only willing to accept keeping it secret when he feels there is no other choice. Beyond his rejection of secrecy, Lil Nas X's MONTERO also features his embrace of queer lust and self-expression. The lyric, "Shoot a child in your mouth while I'm riding," is an explicit reference to Lil Nas X having gay sex. When asked about this lyric in the Genius video, Lil Nas X says, "Let's normalize having these lines in songs. Quote, the same way somebody might talk about fucking a girl or fucking a guy. With opposite genders, quote. And that he feels this normalization of discussion of gay sex within mainstream music is really important for queer representation in general. He's embracing his lust here and rejecting the concept that heterosexual intercourse is the only natural way to get pleasure. By emphasizing the pleasurable aspect of sex, Lil Nas X invokes what Gail Rubin, the author of Thinking Sex, calls a pluralistic sexual ethics that would, quote, judge sexual acts by the way partners treat one another, the level of mutual consideration, the presence of absence or of coercion, and the quantity and quality of the pleasure they provide, quote, without ethical concerns for the sexuality, number of partners involved, etc. Rubin's take on sexual ethics denies this heteronormative society that views, quote, heterosexuality as the only normal and natural expression of sexuality. Enculturation's article talks about how the articulation of complex emotional experiences is key to queer rhetoric. For example, quote, the pleasure of naming desire and claiming community, quote. When Lil Nas X is talking about wanting to fuck the ones I envy, he is taking pleasure in expressing his desire. Lil Nas X is embracing his lust here as a queer individual, and as he describes it, when he says envy, he doesn't, quote, mean somebody who may be above me professionally or like sexier than me or like stronger than me. It's just like, okay, I love what this person is about. I love what this person is doing. I want this person. When Lil Nas X says he loves what this person is doing, he could be referring to them being explicitly out, based on his earlier rejection of his lover being in the closet. He wants to be with somebody he envies for their expression of their identity. Ironically enough, by making MONTERO, Lil Nas X is freely expressing his own identity, queerness and all, thus embodying the person he envies. Another way Lil Nas X represents his lust and expresses himself is through the imagery of his music video. The opening act features him being tempted into sin by a snake. This is a reference to the biblical Garden of Eden and the serpent. According to Joseph Howley, an associate professor at Columbia University who was interviewed by Time magazine, quote, the story of the garden is a tradition that is historically misogynistic. It aligns women with evil. It aligns sexuality with women and with evil. Lil Nas X is turning that on its head with the way that his character and the serpent interact. Because heteronormativity upholds the patriarchy, Lil Nas X's non-misogynistic take on the serpent deliberately rebels against the patriarchy and heteronormativity. In the music video, Lil Nas X passes a tree inscribed with the Greek phrase that translates as, after the division the two parts of men, each desiring his own half. According to Andrew Cho, quote, the phrase is taken from Plato's groundbreaking philosophical text Symposium, and specifically from a passage delivered by Plato's rendering of the playwright Aristophanes. Quote, the playwright tells the origin of mankind where humans were originally two bodies stuck together, quote, some man and man, some woman and woman, and some man and woman. When these bodies were pulled apart by Zeus, they each longed for their other half, which is why we feel love and desire for different types of bodies. Interestingly enough, this text is also referenced by Alyssa Wilkinson's review of the movie Call Me By Your Name, where she tries to explain the name of the movie in relation to the Symposium text, that it is the origin story for, quote, what we moderns might call soulmates. Quote, Lil Nas X's reference to this text shows his interest in the origins of love and lust, invalidating the existence of queer lust in particular. According to Kabir at Medium, the hidden meaning of the painting, The Creation of Adam, is that, quote, God's imminent touch to Adam will breathe life into him and ultimately will give life to all mankind. It is therefore the birth of the human race, quote. The cover art for MONTERO is a direct reference to this painting, featuring two different versions of Lil Nas X about to touch. This cover art could represent many different aspects of Nas's identity. For example, calling his lover by his own name, the birth of his public identity, the fact that he's blessed by God, the lyric, God was shining on me with his success, a separation of two halves, Plato's Symposium, or finding his truest self through his music. Now the moment you've been waiting for, how MONTERO rebels against heteronormativity. On the day of the song's release, Lil Nas X tweeted a letter addressed to his younger self. It reads, "Dear 14-year-old MONTERO, I wrote a song with our name in it. It's about a guy I met last summer. I know we promised to never come out publicly. I know we promised to never be that type of gay person. I know we promised to die with the secret. But this will open doors for many other queer people to simply exist. You see, this is very scary for me. People will be angry. They will say I'm pushing an agenda. But the truth is, I am. The agenda is to make sure people stay the fuck out of other people's lives and stop dictating who they should be. Sending you love from the future, Lil Nas X." The line, quote, "I know we promised to never come out publicly," quote, implies that Lil Nas X thought it was unsafe or inherently wrong to be openly gay when he was younger, a concept many queer people struggle with. As Harbeck states in the introduction of their book, quote, "Homosexuality has been viewed as a sin, a sickness, a crime," quote, "in the past, and that it's not surprising that queer people, especially younger people who have, quote, same-sex desires, choose to remain invisible rather than face the harsh consequences, quote, of societal intolerance." Lil Nas X's note to his past self says that he is pushing an agenda, which is, quote, "to make people stay the fuck out of other people's lives and stop dictating who they should be," quote. This agenda lines up quite well with what enculturation lists as the other focus of queer rhetoric, which is questioning, quote, "the regimes of discursive control through which bodies are disciplined and subjectivities reified as straight and others as bent." The MONTERO music video is ripe with various historical and cultural references in the vein of Greco-Roman, medieval Christian motifs and messages in both Greek and Latin. In Lil Nas X's interview with Time magazine, he said he deliberately wanted to include these symbols and references to connect ancient and modern-day persecution of queer identities. Lil Nas X says, quote, "I want to use these things that have been around for so long to tell my own story and the story of so many other people in the community, or people who have been outcast in general through history," quote. Lil Nas X wants to remind people that no matter how accepting society seems today, this is and has been a heteronormative society that rejects queer people simply for existing and especially for expressing their identities and desires. According to definitions.net, the phrase "sign of the times" is strongly associated with Roman Catholicism. It comes from the Gospel of Matthew and came to signify a need for the church to be more attuned with the world around it in order to remain faithful to its calling. When Lil Nas X is using this phrase, he is referring to homophobes saying it is, quote, "a sign of the times every time that I speak," quote. In his Genius interview, Lil Nas X explains that every time he opens his mouth, it seems as if he is speaking for so many other people, that they see it as a marker of, quote, "how things are changing and how fast things are changing," quote. Lil Nas X's use of the phrase invokes the Roman Catholic Church and points out that by calling his music, quote, "a sign of the times," homophobes are actually acknowledging that their heteronormative view of society is actively being challenged by Lil Nas X all of the time. Towards the middle of the video, Lil Nas X is seen ascending to heaven. Instead of being greeted by St. Peter, he sees a male angel that resembles Ganymede, a Greek mythological figure. In their article, Cho explains that, quote, "Ganymede, according to lore, was a boy whose beauty was so intense that Zeus turned into an eagle and carried him to Olympus. He has long been a symbol of homosexuality," quote. Roland Bentoncourt, a professor of the University of California, says that, quote, "in this moment of Christian ascent, you have this very queer iconography in this early example of representation of same-gender desire and antiquity," quote. By flipping another classic Christian idea, Nas is rebelling against the idea that queerness is a novel and unnatural aspect of human nature. In conclusion, I'd like to quote Stephen Fullwood, a scholar of Black LGBTQ history, in reference to the backlash that MONTERO has gotten from traditional establishments and Christians. Quote, "When people say we need to protect the children, it's a lazy distraction from really looking at rock and roll, at people being rebellious. Your kid's first influence is going to be the culture that they grew up with and the education that they got. It's not Lil Nas X, it wasn't Little Richard, it wasn't Prince. They hate whatever is counter to the idea of a particular kind of white, heterosexual male sensibility." I feel like Fullwood gets to the heart of the issue here. MONTERO is a rebellion, as Lil Nas X rejects the secrecy that upholds a heteronormative society, as he expresses his identity and embraces his lust, and makes his point about the validity of queer identities in the face of a heteronormative society that would otherwise exclude them. Thank you for watching. Here are my sources.